Hello, hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Paladins is the game. And today I'd like to talk about my 5 favorite Cassie cards. I've been playing a lot of Cassie, been playing quite successfully with Cassie, if I do say so myself, and have really been enjoying a certain set of her cards. So I wanted to go ahead and identify those cards, because I think if you run into them in game and start to experiment with them, you'll find that they might just be Cassie's 5 best cards in your opinion as well. Now, do keep in mind that Paladins is still pretty early in its closed beta, and these cards are changing pretty regularly based on updates from Hi-Rez. So, depending on when you watch this video, these cards might not all look exactly the same. But in general, if they have similar stats or similar abilities, then I think you'll still find them quite successful. But who knows, I might release an updated list in the future with 5 new or changed Cassie cards that I like even better than these. But for now, these are the 5 cards that are bringing me the most success. And in no particular order, we're just going to go in the order of the collection here, but starting off with Blast Shower. This card is a specialty card, as it's now called. It's something you unlock at level 1 in each game, and kind of helps you define a path you can move down, in this case specifically with your ability Blast Shot. That is Cassie's Q that fires a big area of effect blast of damage, which is great for engaging enemies who happen to be on the point. It's also just really good for doing damage. It has a small knockback and does a pretty substantial amount of damage. And this actually modifies the ability so that instead of one really big one, it shoots 3 smaller blast shots in succession that do 3 rounds of damage, and each knock back opponents a little bit. So opponents will kind of go pop, 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 and float into the air in 3 little individual mini steps, which can really disrupt people. It's really disorienting when it happens to you, if you ever see it in game. It kind of just takes over your screen. It makes aiming pretty impossible for a second or two while you're both floating in the air and you're trying to realign your target after you land. So it has an impact defensively, but it also just pumps out a ton of damage, especially when you start to combine it with other blast shot buffs later on with other cards. So it makes Cassie a real threat, and it's much easier to hit than her standard weapon attacks too. I mean, eventually you'll get the hang of her attacks no matter what, but this removes some of that challenge and kind of guarantees you can hit the capture point really powerfully every once in a while just based on your cooldowns. The other great thing about this card is it actually has a 30% damage modifier. That means all your weapon attacks and your ability attacks get buffed by 30% while this card is active. And with a 40-second cooldown, that's not too bad for what essentially was a legendary card very recently. And it won't penalize you too much if you die. The health bonus is nothing to remark over. It's just 100 health. That's not a lot and won't be that impactful. But everything else about this card is incredibly strong. And in the old days, you could only get Blast Shower at level 5. And I would always just wait for that moment when I finally got Blast Shower. And I felt like I could really take over a game. But now, thankfully, it actually unlocks at the very beginning of a game, so I can make an impact much sooner, and I really feel like I'm playing Cassie essentially right from the start. So the next best card for me with Cassie is called Megaton. This is another Blast Shot modifier, and again, I do think Blast Shot is really core to Cassie's success. Her weapon attacks are a little unreliable. Her escape is great, but you have to have a powerful blast shot if you ever want to make big, sweeping plays that can swing games in your favor or even win games for your team. And Megaton is another card that allows you to do that. Its stats are pretty unremarkable at plus 10%. That's one of the lower options you can get as a Cassie card. You'll see most of these other rares and even these commons are 15 to 20%. So 10% is a little low. You're taking a somewhat of a damage penalty, but the effect here is nuts. Blast Shot has a 60% radius and increased knock-up. So you're gaining a ton of damage because you can hit more people in a bigger circle, essentially. And you're also knocking them back even farther. So if you hit the center of a capture point with this card, you're basically knocking the entire enemy team off the capture point for a second or two. So it allows you to make pretty interesting positioning plays and zoning plays. And in combination with Blast Shower in particular, When it's hitting 3 times and each one's knocking up in a much bigger area and doing more damage in a much bigger area, you can just wreak havoc on the enemy team. If they're all sitting at like 25%, you might kill 3 or 4 people with one blast shot thanks to Megaton and blast shower. But even if you don't have blast shower, Megaton is still a good card. It makes it even easier to hit your blast shots and makes them more impactful when you do. So despite the poor stats of this card, I still personally think that it's totally worth it. So up next, my third favorite Cassie card in Paladins is Flea. This one modifies your dodge roll. That's your escape, your F, where you can essentially somersault in any given direction. But this modifies your Flea and it gives you a 120% movement buff for 3 seconds after rolling. So basically, after you do your little somersault, you also get to run at full mounted speed, or maybe even more. I'm not exactly sure what mounted speed is, but you get to run really fast regardless for 3 seconds. So this is the ultimate escape card. And if you don't have Flea, it can sometimes be pretty easy for an enemy EV or an enemy Sky to come into your allied back line where you're going to be standing and shooting arrows from really far away and just start to destroy you. If a Sky gets the jump on you, you have a very hard time as Cassie killing her, just because positionally it's easier for her to hit shots. She has tons of burst damage. If she gets the jump, you have to swing around and find her, and then even if you hit every shot, usually she can still kill you. So Flea gives you a tool to escape in those scenarios. It makes you almost unkillable to an extent, as long as you position well and always mind your cooldowns. When you have Flea up and you can somersault and then run really fast, no one can actually catch you. You might get a lucky shot or two if you're super low and you could still die, but 97% of the time, Flea means you'll get away. And the way I play Cassie is kind of a hit and run style. I like to stand really far away and just ping everyone from afar. If they want to commit to the back line to engage me, then I'll just flee away, let them squander the next 5 seconds, run back in, and start all over again. So it's really just that hit and run mentality, and that's what Flea enables you to do. But that's not the only great thing about this card. It also still has a really strong damage modifier. So it's a defensive card in nature based on the effect, but it's still an offensive card too. If you look at the stuff around it, 10, 10, 15, 12, it's beyond a specialty or legendary, the highest possible damage modifier that Cassie can get. So you're not really giving up too much damage to get this defensive buff. So it's a really nice balanced card that fits the playstyle of Cassie and makes you much better in dueling scenarios or really just escaping scenarios. Alright, so for my fourth favorite Cassie card, we're just going down the page here a little bit, and we're going to take a look at Reload. This is another blast shot buff. The stats on it aren't too amazing. It's actually got really low health with only 50 health. That's almost meaningless. And the 12% damage is nothing you want to pass up, but it's not going to leave you in awe, right? It's far worse than the 20% buff on some of these other cards. But the thing about this is, if you use Blast Shot well, and you're patient with your Blast Shot, and you make sure you're getting off meaningful Blast Shots that hit 2 to 3 targets, this can essentially make your Blast Shots infinite cooldown. If we take a look at Cassie, it doesn't actually list the cooldowns here. I wish it did, but I think the cooldown is 15 seconds or somewhere thereabouts. I don't know the exact number, but many times in game, when you hit multiple enemies on the point, your blast shot will just be instantly reloaded thanks to this card. So you can just fire off one, let it hit, fire off a second. Even if you only hit 2 or 3 people, it's still reducing your cooldown enough that you can fire it off every 2 to 3 seconds. And honestly, even if you're just using it with one person in a duel, the 4 seconds that it buys you can actually be enough to get it off again in the same little engagement or skirmish so that you can secure a kill that you would otherwise lose thanks to the damage and the knockback and all the other side effect bonuses that Blast Shot offers. So at its very best, this card is totally insane and lets you do ridiculous scary things to the point. If the enemy team is all bunched up, you can just unbelievably destroy them with ease thanks to reload and blast shot and blast shower and Megaton and all these other cards that buff blast shot. These certainly aren't the only ones, but there's lots of others no matter what cards you happen to draw. This one basically just makes all those other blast shot cards, even trauma or kinetics or misdirection's a great card too, makes all of those that much better because you can just continually keep firing blast shots and taking advantage of all those buffs to blast shot that all these other cards offer as well. So the damage isn't crazy, the health is awful, but the effect is insane and makes you a very frightening threat to come up against. So for my final card, you won't be too surprised. It's yet another blast shot modifier, but this one is a legendary. You'll receive it level 5 in some games, and it's actually Serrated Arrow. It's got a really nice stat allocation with 30% damage and 250 health. That's the best that Cassie can get in both cases. So that's going to go a long way just towards modifying your base stats. But the effect here is really, really strong. You'll bleed enemies for 320 damage over 4 seconds. And that's actually a lot of damage. Even in the late game, that's something like 10% plus of many heroes' health pool. So it's like a 10% dot that's just going to make it very hard for them to stay alive. It changes their thinking and strategy because they realize they're taking all this extra damage over a long period of time, so they have to be more careful. They might disengage a little sooner because they're worried about the dot damage. On the other side of the coin, they might think they have lots of health and not realize that they're about to burn for 320 damage over the next 4 seconds, so they commit a little too hard and you're able to secure a kill that otherwise they would have left a little sooner. So sometimes it's great at getting those kills that people are running away and the last few ticks knock them off. Adding up tons of damage over a long engagement at the capture point. If you get off 3 blast shots on 3 or 4 people, you're talking about, tens of thousands of damage points just in a couple little fights just from one card. And when it does combine with all these other blast shot buffs, the effect is even crazier. So it can do a lot of insane things. Now, there are a lot of other great legendaries, don't get me wrong, all these are really strong cards, but if you want to go with a blast shot build, and that's really my focus, you'll notice that the rest of these are weapon modifiers or 1 scout modifier. So this is the final piece of the blast shot puzzle for me, and it fits my build, and I think it's absolutely wonderful and can pump out just ridiculous amounts of damage. I almost always top the damage charts as Cassie thinks to all these blast shot buffs, and this is the one that really seals the deal and secures more kills than I can even count. So for me, it is my 5th favorite Cassie card. I do want to note that just because these are my favorite cards, there are a lot of other good Cassie cards that I would happily accept. Drain Life is a fine card. Double Tap's a fine card. Heavy Cord is a fine card. Misdirection, I think, is a great card. Trauma is an okay card. Kinetics is a great card. Let's see. Battle Focus is a very strong card. And Big Game is a great card, especially if the enemy team has a couple tanks like Fernando and Buck, or even Ruckus on their team. That this really starts to add up. So, Stay Here is a fantastic card as well. Might be number 6 for me even. So, depending on your playstyle or just what you've encountered in the game, your top 5 list might look a little different than mine. But again, I just want to run through my top 5 real quickly. That's Blast Shower, that's Megaton, Flea, Reload, and finally Serrated Arrow. Anytime you're able to get those cards in combination, that would really be my dream build that makes me almost unkillable as Cassie and allows me to get just an absurd amount of kills and tons of poke damage throughout a game. So that's it for me and my top 5 Cassie cards. Please let me know if I've missed something or if I have overlooked a card that you think is absolutely wonderful and is winning you games left and right. I'd love to hear about it. I want to try it out myself. So feel free to leave a comment. If you have any questions about Paladins in general or any of these cards or playing Cassie well, I'd be happy to discuss it with you. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.